Today we profile Jonathan Aiken. Jonathan is the only British cabinet minister in its history to serve prison time. He was very close to Chuck Colson, and he's the British version of Chuck Colson because of his work with Prison Fellowship Europe. He's a shining example of God doing his greatest work with the least likely people. He was born in Dublin, Ireland. He earned a law degree from Oxford University. He served as a war correspondent during the 1960s in Vietnam and Biafra. He served for 23 years in the British Parliament. He was England's Defence Minister and Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He was one of the 2 or 3 prime candidates to become the future Prime Minister of England. He described himself as a quote-unquote summary Christian. I went to church once a week, did all the right things, but I had been in a wrong relationship with God. I treated God rather like I used to treat my bank manager. He existed, was someone to be respected, had premises he visited, and would even be helpful with a big overdraft. I rather condescended to God. You see, I was a very important politician. On June 8, 1999, Jonathan pled guilty to perjury for lying about who paid a one-night hotel bill at the Ritz Hotel in Paris. Friends, the bill was approximately $400. He was sentenced immediately to 18 months in jail, handcuffed, and put in a paddy wagon. Just imagine one of the 2 or 3 most powerful politicians in England. Handcuffed, walked out, thrown in the paddy wagon. Every camera, that's all the country watched. The paddy wagon goes to the jail. They get him out, cameras everywhere, people screaming, his followers, his detractors. He's scared to the bone. And as they're marching him into the jail, a homeless guy jumps out and sticks a crumpled up piece of paper into his hand. And the cops, of course, get the homeless guy out. And Jonathan just puts the piece of paper in his pocket. They throw him in the cell. The prisoners are screaming, "Jonathan, here's what we're going to do to you." He's petrified. He went from here, all the power, suddenly stripped of everything. And that night, he's on his knees, and he takes out this piece of crumpled paper. And it was Psalm 130. "Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let my ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can with reverence serve you. I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins." He endured the public agonies of defeat, disgrace, divorce, bankruptcy, and an 18-month jail sentence following his plea of guilty to charges of perjury. He ended up serving 7 months. During his stay in prison, Aitken rediscovered the Bible, learned Greek, and became a student of Christian theology at Wycliffe Hall, Oxford. This part of his life is covered in 2 autobiographical works called Pride and Perjury and Porridge and Passion. He told me, "Jack, pride is the deadliest of sins, and I was bursting with pride, and it was my downfall. And I personally believe a crucial ingredient in rehabilitation is to admit that you completely screwed up, and in our pain and brokenness, we come closest to Christ." The dying John Newton once said, "I'm a great sinner, but Christ is a great Savior." Today, Jonathan Aiken is a campaigner for prison reform. It's amazing, friends, how often God does his greatest work with the least likely people. I mentioned that Jonathan was very close with Chuck Colson, the founder of Prison Fellowship, who had also gone to prison for lying about Pentagon Papers. One time, Chuck Colson told me, "Jack, other than the Jewish carpenter, Jesus, you could argue that 3 of the greatest men of faith in the history of the world would be David, Moses, and St. Paul. 10 billion people to walk the face of the earth, 3 of the greatest men of faith. David, Moses, and St. Paul." Friends, they had one other thing in common. David, Moses, and St. Paul were all murderers. David killed Bathsheba's husband because he wanted Bathsheba. Moses was killing the Pharaoh's people, and Saul of Tarsus was killing these Christians. And here God took 3 murderers and made them 3 of the greatest men of faith. And Chuck Colson would tell that story whenever he visited prisoners all over the world. Jonathan Aiken is the author of 13 books, including award-winning biographies of Richard Nixon, Margaret Thatcher, and Chuck Colson. Jonathan has sent a similar letter to 50-plus public men sentenced to prison. Its basic message is, I've been where you're at. You can come through it. Planet Prison is a mighty strange place with its own culture, language, and customs. But it is full of surprises, a lot of them pleasant. I've made the same prediction to at least 40-plus men on their way into prison during the past many years, including 4 parliamentarians. Few of them believed me at the time, but all of them have since acknowledged that the forecast was right. So take heart. You may at moments have a bumpy ride, but it should not be a very nasty or vicious one. The short-term struggle to be a positive prisoner is largely with you. On good days, you will find satisfaction in doing the sort of good works mentioned earlier. There are other options, such as using the resources of prison education department to master a language or new subject. If you are interested in the spiritual journey, prison can be a great place to start deep reversion. But there will be bad days too. Coping with them will be difficult. One important mindset is to strive to flush all anger, resentment, and rage on past issues down the loo of life. Looking still further ahead, please keep at the forefront of your mind that there is a good and new life to be had after prison. It will be a different life, as mine has been. But count your blessings. Even though I found coming out of jail harder than going in, I have been happier and more fulfilled in my post-prison years than I was on the fast track of public life. May it be the same for you. One of his many books that has really helped me personally is Prayers for People Under Pressure. And it has 7 parts. Part 1, Journey into Prayer. Part 2, Prayers of Adoration. Part 3, Prayers of Confession. Part 4, Prayers of Thanksgiving. Part 5, Prayers of our relationship with God. Part 6, how not to pray. And lastly, Part 7, supplication. Jonathan is the executive director of the Trinity Forum Europe and also serves as director of nonprofit organizations, including Prison Fellowship International and the McDonald Agape Foundation. In 2017, he wrote me his philosophy of life. Dear Jack, my philosophy of life has changed with age and experience. It is now focused on 3 words beginning with F: faith, family, and friends. When I was a young, ambitious politician, I followed the somewhat cynical advice in the lines of Alexander Pope. Get place and wealth, if possible with grace. If not, by any means, get wealth and place. But having gone some way to achieving those goals, I had a career disaster, entirely my own, when a cabinet minister, which resulted in the consequences of defeat, disgrace, divorce, bankruptcy, and jail. A royal flush of crisis by anyone's standard. The experience of descent was painful, yet paradoxically enriching. Having lost all place and wealth, I was guided to the path of God's grace. This was a challenging spiritual journey inspired by several fine Christian friends and teachers. It included 3 years studying theology at Wycliffe Hall, Oxford. It still involves extensive work in prison ministry, authorship, and service to charitable foundations, particularly the McDonald Agape Foundation. I now have no interest in possessions, power, or worldly prizes. I have a much happier life whose center is prayer and peace with God. I know who my real friends are, and I cherish them. I love my wife and family. I am still extremely active, but I hope I have moved from the self-centered life towards the God-centered life. Continuing along this road is today's my life's purpose and philosophy. Sincerely and warmly, Jonathan Aiken. Friends, that's the story of Jonathan Aiken. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy these messages of inspiration and hope, please like, subscribe, and or share them with family and friends. Until we meet again, please remember, with God, anything is possible. Spong.